I think it was quite interesting. Good questions I had, and I used it as an opportunity to go give a bit of a novel talk for me. If you've followed me, I've probably given like 5 different open timestamps talks in the past few months, so this one was a little different. I mean, the thing I find about doing talks in person is, reality is, the bandwidth of communicating someone in person is so much higher. You can go back and forth, and they can go ask you questions. They can go read all those nonverbal cues and all this other stuff people like to talk about, and understand what you're really talking about much better than if you're trying to go write some email or something on a mailing list. It's not the only way to go learn, but I happen to be an opportunity where I can travel, so I might as well go and help the community that way, and do these kinds of talks. And I'm always happy to go and introduce new people to this technology. Well, I'm going to go on a bit of a limb and actually define blockchain community a little differently than what you're thinking, which is who actually uses this tech? And the biggest deployment of blockchain tech is certificate transparency. That's what your web browser uses to be sure that the website you're talking to is the website you think you're talking to. Now, the authors of certificate transparency seem to hate the term blockchain, but it is a chain of blocks. And the beautiful thing about that is that community is enormous, and they don't even necessarily know they're part of that community. That's kind of coming into normal crypto. And it didn't even need the sort of Bitcoin/blockchain people to do that. It's just part of crypto. And I think in the future, we're going to see much more understanding in the very, very broad crypto community of what blockchains are and what they're useful for. Well, I think there's an industry, often scammers using the term blockchain to go push things that don't really work, don't really exist, and so on. And I think that's a bit unfortunate because that kind of overshadows how chains of blocks are a useful cryptography technique. And at the same time, I think there is a real genuine industry of real companies solving real problems that are making use of this, which is another facet of cryptography. And like many things, a lot of the tech needed to use a blockchain has been around or in development for a very long time. But once you kind of fit all the pieces together, it sort of makes a leap from, in theory, you could do this, to yes, you can actually do this. And I think that's where we're seeing the real applications making that final leap to deployable stuff. Well, your best example is certificate transparency. It works, it's used. It has made a very big impact to the certificate system. This is, if you want to know how big of an impact it is, ask the likes of, say, Symantec about how well their CA business is doing now that certificate transparency caught them committing fraud. Or, ask Let's Encrypt users. Well, Let's Encrypt was a model to encrypt the internet that wasn't really feasible until you could audit things sufficiently well to root out fraud. Now that you can, Let's Encrypt can operate. That's a huge advancement. Or, of course, ask the many different uses for, say, Bitcoin for paying people. Well, I'd actually say R3 is a bit of a hopeful example in that they've taken a problem, which is fintech stuff. They've thrown technology that's, reasonably likely to work, has reasonable scaling properties and so on, and solved kind of boring problems. Now, is this exciting? Not really. This is just better accounting. Better accounting can be very good. Accounting itself is a good example where, double entry accounting revolutionized business. And the way it did it was making trust a little less necessary. And I think the problem companies like R3 will run into is currently, for many applications, we already trust each other fairly well, and that type of fraud isn't a big deal. That's not always true. Let's Encrypt is an example where fraud was a big deal, and by getting it to closer to zero, you can make a big revolution. But that's not going to be true in many cases. And I think much of the blockchain hype comes from people making claims that just don't bear water, or making claims where you, in theory, get fraud down to zero in this very narrow threat model, but there are much bigger issues to worry about. So fixing that just isn't going to fix this much bigger problem. Well, I always go to this example of blockchain as a chain of blocks. It's not that complex. People trying to make it more complex than that tend to be trying to go sell you something, including sometimes Bitcoins. This whole Bitcoin, not blockchain thing, I think ignores the fact that there's a hell of a lot of things that are databases, and we want them to be better databases. Well, what's a better database? Slap a blockchain on it. You can nearly always make a database better by putting a blockchain on it, for the simple fact that if it has a blockchain on it, you and I can better go audit it because we can agree on the same thing. Or if you look at, say, a file system, well, older style file systems, like FAT or ext2 or whatever, it wasn't really possible to say, all right, this should be the state of the file system. Whereas things like, ButterFS, well, they're based on blockchain-ish like hashes, and you can say from this root of the state, let's drill down and ensure everything's the way it should be. That's blockchain tech. It's not going to get called that, but it is ultimately blockchain tech and adds a lot of value. Well, when you talk about like PR, you got to think about your audience, right? If your audience is boring regulators who want to go control the world, maybe you should talk about certificate transparency. Although even they might get annoyed that it doesn't let them go defraud people. If you're a government, you might not like certificate transparency because it means that you no longer can hijack websites. It's a big problem if you're, say, China and are trying to do man-in-the-middle attacks. On the other hand, if you want something maybe really out of the way, you go talk about how Bitcoin lets you go donate money to the likes of WikiLeaks. That's not necessarily a popular thing among all of the political spectrum, but certainly is of some. Or you go something in the middle and point out how, say, if I want to, say, donate money to a Planned Parenthood organization, in many countries that's illegal. You're supporting abortion. Or in other places you're supporting not abortion. There's just lots of political freedom issues with money. In much the same way as there are lots of issues with freedom of speech. Many people want to attack freedom of speech. Many people want to attack the freedom of speech of your money. Bitcoin and other currencies are potentially a big PR talking point there, but it's not going to appeal to all audiences. Well, basically all currencies are digital currencies. The ultimate ledger of truth in currency systems is nearly always digital. I don't know, maybe some terrible backwards country like North Korea might be keeping it all on paper, but if you go to most places in the world, it's going to be digital records. So yeah, most places are digital currencies already. Equally, most places you can transfer money digitally. Cryptocurrency is not about being able to move money digitally, it's about auditing. And in the case of a decentralized cryptocurrency, the ability to go move money and audit it without permission. But when you're talking about a government currency, obviously there's permission and central authority and control, end of story. So the cryptocurrency part of it is just about giving people better ability to audit what happened. Audit what the supply is, audit what the transactions are. And I think in reality, a lot of places don't really care about that. Does even, say, the government of Canada care about giving people the ability to audit the money supply? Probably not as much as you think. Well, when it comes to convincing, it might not be as convincing as cash in your pockets, but in the future, governments are trying to outlaw cash. Likes of Visa and MasterCard are trying to outlaw cash. Well, of course, if you're a Visa and MasterCard, you have pretty strong incentives to get more people paying you money to do transactions. There's lots of political control incentives. One of the scariest consulting clients I ever had was this, I got contacted and they said, all right, we want to do this cash replacement blockchain. And every transaction, everything that you were doing, literally the receipts should go on this blockchain. So if I say buy a magazine off you, what magazine I bought would be on this chain. If I buy a pack of condoms, that would go on that chain and be public. And also they wanted the ability to freeze money at will, move money at will. So if I do something that the government doesn't like, I'd get my accounts frozen and they could take the money at will. Well, of course I go ask, well, all right, that's an interesting set of requirements. What country is this? And the client kind of hummed and hawed and wouldn't really say, it's NDA or so on, but I finally got them to admit it's some fucking dictatorship off in Africa somewhere. And I'm sorry, but when you're asking the ability to freeze people's money at will and have full surveillance of what they're buying, obviously this is a dictatorship who wants political control. Simple as that. And I'm sure Visa or MasterCard would love to waltz in there and provide that capability. Things like Bitcoin, are an attempt to provide an alternative to that. Well, with things like basic income, as an example, I had another client who, long story short, they had a project in a Western country where they wanted a blockchain for welfare recipients. And their goal did happen to be full, financial surveillance of what those welfare recipients spent their money on. But blockchains don't inherently have to be done this way. You can, for that same, first purpose, giving money to people, you can create a blockchain tech that it does not record what the transactions are, where they go, and so on. And in fact, scalable blockchain tech doesn't work that way, because the reason why blockchains don't scale is because we give everyone all the data about everything. Obviously, if you improve on that, it'll have better privacy against at least some threat model, some bad guy, while also scaling better. And it would be very easy for a government to say, all right, we respect financial privacy, we will create a blockchain where people have privacy. I mean, that's easy to do. Why don't they do this? Well, for the same reason that they're trying to get encryption banned. It's a control thing. Well, I mean, I wouldn't say blockchains are a necessary system to allow people to trust each other. Very frequently, they're a system to allow people to not need to trust each other. When you send money on Bitcoin, I don't have to trust you. Through math and incentives, I know with high probability that I'm not going to have that money taken away from me. I know that the money you gave me is real. This isn't based on trust. This is based on math. I'd make the point that governments like China, in part, drive blockchain tech because they provide a use case. If all the governments around the world were trustworthy and democratic and so on, we wouldn't necessarily need this stuff as much. In fact, it's always kind of funny because I'm from Canada, which I think has fairly stable politics, respects freedoms and so on. The people who I find understand the need for Bitcoin the least and are most against the idea of Bitcoin tend to be people involved in Canadian politics. And I think the reason is they see the best possible kind of government, or one of the best governments. They see everything in the rosiest possible vision. From their point of view, it's, why wouldn't you trust government to say, not surveil you, respect freedom of speech, get a warrant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Their perspective is always from the positive side of, we got to go stop the bad guys, and the bad guys aren't the government. The bad guys are small-time criminals. But if you flip that around and think from the perspective of fascism, the bad guys are frequently the government, the authorities. It's just a matter of perspective and where you happen to go live. And if you didn't have bad guys as authorities, you wouldn't need this tech as much. We'd be able to go trust other entities to protect our freedoms. But because of governments like China, and unfortunately, Britain is kind of moving in this direction, US is moving in this direction, many places are moving in this direction. We can't trust them, thus we need this tech. I mean, the term blockchain is too broad. I mean, like the example of certificate transparency, some blockchains are going to be anything but decentralized. They'll be very centralized. They'll be about auditing centralized systems. Other things will be very decentralized. I mean, it just depends on what you're talking about exactly. In terms of decentralized cryptocurrencies, chances are it's going to be mainly Bitcoin for a long time to come. There's a big network effect and a ton of people who are motivated for the right reasons are very smart working on it. Other things often don't have that. They have people who may be smart but not motivated for the right reasons. Motivated out of greed, for instance, so may not have ethics involved. Some chains have none of this, and no smart people working on them, no ethics. I mean, it's just a big mix. Equally, I mean, if Bitcoin wasn't on top in 10 years, that wouldn't surprise me either. 10 years is a long time. Surely someone can come with something better. You got to ask, who would want to develop decentralized tech? I mean, I don't know if banks really care that much. Large companies, they probably don't really care that much in most cases. Communities of people, very frequently the interests align. So yeah, probably will be communities. It may get funding from banks and large companies and so on, but will that be the main push? Probably not, and that just hasn't been what we've seen for any of this tech. I think like when you're talking about physical communities, I tend to find that there aren't that many differences, and travel is so cheap these days. It doesn't really matter that much where you actually live. It's can you get to the place you want to be to go see the person you want to go see, and with say the amount of money many of us go charge per hour for consulting, well, we don't really care that you might pay $1,000 to go on a flight and then spend 2 nights in a hotel somewhere. Like, it's not necessarily such a big deal. What you really care about is this time efficient? Can you see someone in person and make use of that? Well, what I consistently find is talking to people in person is just much more efficient for certain types of teaching than written material, emails, and so on. I mean, you can just communicate so much in such little amount of time talking to someone face to face. And I happen to enjoy that type of thing, so I'm willing to do a lot of it.